In the sky, 25,000 feet above Germany, Staff Sergeant Michael Romano sat cramped in the tail section of his B-17 flying fortress, a machine gun in each hand. The air was frigid, the temperature plunging to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Romano's breath froze in front of him as he aimed through his ring and bead sight, a crude system made of 2 metal posts. Through the small plexiglass window, he could see the silhouette of a Fokker Wolf 190 approaching from behind a deadly predator, circling, about to attack from the bomber's most vulnerable angle. In a matter of seconds, it would be too late. Romano fired, watching as his tracers arced harmlessly behind the fighter. The German pilot, relentless, unleashed 20mm shells that ripped through the aluminum of the bomber, sending shrapnel into the fuselage. It wasn't just Romano. This scene repeated itself 291 times that day. In the second Schweinfurt raid, the 8th Air Force dispatched 291 bombers deep into Germany without fighter escorts. By the end of the day, 60 bombers were lost, more than 20% of the attacking force. Another 138 would be so damaged they'd never fly again. The odds were brutal. The statistics were unsustainable. Bomber crews, including tail gunners like Romano, had little chance of survival. And yet, that very same day, something extraordinary happened on a cold, hard stand at Bassingbourn Airfield, England. A two-year-old tail gunner with nothing but a high school education would sketch out an idea that violated military regulations, a crazy design that would change everything. This was the beginning of an innovation that would triple tail gun accuracy and save thousands of American lives. But what was it about Romano's idea that made it so revolutionary? And why did it take an unlikely hero to break the rules to save the very system that was supposed to protect him? Let's find out. Imagine yourself as a tail gunner on a B-17 flying fortress, responsible for protecting an entire crew. You're sitting in a cramped space no bigger than a coffin, kneeling on a bicycle seat, your feet braced against the aircraft structure. The weight of the twin 50 caliber machine guns is more than you can carry for long periods, but you're stuck with them anyway. In the freezing cold, your hands, clad in bulky gloves, grip the guns and aim through the ring and bead sights, a primitive aiming system that's about as advanced as a frontier rifle. The concept of defensive armament on a bomber like the B-17 was designed to create overlapping fields of fire, theoretically offering protection against enemy fighters. But in practice, it was a disaster. The B-17's defensive capability was supposed to make it a flying fortress, something that could fly into enemy territory, drop its payload, and return home without the need for fighter escorts. But reality was different. The tail gunner's position, the one that Romano manned, was the bomber's last line of defense. But the problem was glaringly simple. Visibility was minimal. The tail gunner had no real way to see his target, let alone calculate the correct aim. There was no targeting system that compensated for the bomber's speed or the speed of the incoming fighter. The tail gun's only advantage was its sheer volume of fire. Theoretically, if enough bullets were fired, one might hit the target. But the accuracy rates? Below 8%. In practice, these numbers meant little, especially when facing skilled Luftwaffe pilots who would dive in from 6 o'clock low, barely 200 yards away, unleashing devastating 20mm cannon rounds. These attacks were so accurate that it was a miracle for tail gunners to even scratch the fighters, let alone shoot them down. As the casualty reports piled up, the 8th Air Force began to question whether daylight precision bombing could even work. The losses were catastrophic, and something had to change. For Michael Romano, a 19-year-old factory worker from Pittsburgh, this situation was more than just a set of numbers on a casualty report. It was personal. Assigned to the 91st Bomb Group as a replacement tail gunner, He had no engineering background or formal training. He had been thrown into a position where he had to trust a gun sight system that, in his eyes, was fatally flawed. 6 weeks of basic training hadn't prepared him for the horrors he would witness. Romano's first mission came on the 19th of August 1943, over the Netherlands. His heart raced as the bombers went into enemy territory. When the Luftwaffe attacked, he fired over 480 rounds at 3, attacking Focke-Wulf 190 seconds. He was certain he hit them. But when the gun camera footage was reviewed, not a single tracer had connected. 2 bombers from his formation were destroyed. Romano was devastated. With each mission, his frustration grew. It wasn't just the overwhelming odds that wore him down, it was the futility of it all. He knew the system wasn't working. The tail gunners were supposed to be the bombers' last line of defense, but they were barely making a dent. By the time he finished his 3rd mission, he couldn't just sit back and accept this any longer. One night, after his 3rd mission, he stood staring at his guns. His hands were still shaking, not from fear but from exhaustion. It was then that an idea began to take shape, born out of his sheer determination to find a way to make the guns work. Romano realized that the problem wasn't with the gun itself, nor the mount. It was that tail gunners had no way to accurately track or predict the movement of enemy aircraft. He didn't have a clear sight of where his bullets were going. He was blindly firing into space, hoping for the best. What if there was a way to see where his bullets were actually going before he fired? Could there be a way to fix this? The realization didn't hit him as some grand, dramatic epiphany. It was a simple, quiet observation. He was staring at the reflection of his guns in the plexiglass window of the tail section when it clicked. What if he could use that reflection to guide his fire? What if, by combining a simple mirror system with a reflector sight, he could track his bullet's trajectory and adjust his aim accordingly? It was an idea that would seem crazy to anyone looking at it from a traditional military standpoint, but to Romano, it made perfect sense. He was no engineer, but in that moment, he knew he had found something that could potentially save lives, starting with his own. Romano knew that what he was about to do wasn't just a risky move, it was an outright violation of military regulations. The Army Air Force had strict rules about modifications to the aircraft, especially when it came to weaponry. Unauthorized changes to defensive armament could lead to serious consequences, including court-martial. But at that moment, Romano was desperate. The existing system wasn't just flawed, it was killing men, including his friends, and Romano wasn't about to sit back and wait for the bureaucracy to figure things out. The next night, he walked to the maintenance hangar with a flashlight and his logbook in hand. He climbed into the tail section of his B-17, his fingers still tingling from the cold, his mind racing. Using a carpenter's protractor salvaged from the base machine shop, he started sketching a design. What he envisioned was simple, a set of small mirrors mounted at strategic angles, providing him with peripheral vision to see the tracer paths as he fired. He could use this feedback to correct his aim in real time, adjusting his fire before the enemy fighter got too close. The crucial element of the design was a reflector sight, something he had seen on other aircraft, but it had never been installed in the tail section. Romano realized that by combining these elements, he could create a makeshift, low-tech version of a high-tech targeting system. But there was a problem. Not only did the design violate Army Air Force regulations, but it also went against everything the military considered safe or standard. If someone found out, the consequences would be dire. But Romano wasn't thinking about court-martial, he was thinking about survival. The lives of the men in his bomber and the countless others who were at risk depended on his idea working. Romano knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed help that wouldn't ask too many questions. That's when he turned to Technical Sergeant Frank Kellerman, a 8-year-old aircraft mechanic who had worked with materials of all kinds, fixing everything from aircraft to bridges. Kellerman looked over Romano's sketches. "This is illegal," he said flatly. Romano nodded. He knew it was, but the reality was that they didn't have time for bureaucracy. Kellerman saw the desperation in Romano's eyes, and after a few moments of silence, he agreed to help. The two men worked in secret, using scavenged parts from other damaged aircraft, curved mirrors from navigation equipment, plexiglass from shattered canopies, and a gun sight from a wrecked P-47 Thunderbolt. Every component they used had been pulled from the wreckage of planes that would never fly again. They worked tirelessly through the night, fabricating the makeshift aiming system with whatever they could find. No one knew they were doing it. No one knew that, by dawn, a B-17 would have a brand new, unauthorized modification known that might change the course of the war. The system was far from perfect. It was crude, barely functional, and mounted in a way that would horrify military engineers if they saw it. But it was something, and to Romano, that was enough. The morning of the 8th of October 1943 came with a sense of quiet anxiety. Romano didn't say a word to anyone about the new sight system installed in his tailgunner position. The pilot, Lieutenant James Holbrook, didn't check the tail section before takeoff. The group commander didn't know. The squadron armament officer had no idea. As far as the military hierarchy was concerned, Romano was simply another tail gunner flying his mission. But as the B-17 took off from Bassingbourn and climbed into the skies over enemy territory, Romano's heart raced not just because of the combat ahead, but because of the unknown. Would his system work? Was it just a pipe dream, or had he actually created something that could make a difference? The mission over Germany was the standard mix of danger and chaos. Luftwaffe fighters were already scrambling to intercept the bombers. Romano kept his focus as the first enemy fighter, Focke-Wulf 190, dove in from 7 high. Romano's eyes locked onto the incoming aircraft. He didn't panic. He didn't have time to. He centered the reticle on the fighter, checked the mirror feedback, and fired. For a brief moment, everything stopped. The gun's roar echoed in his ears, but it wasn't the usual frustration. This time, he could see it. Through the mirrors, he saw the tracer rounds arc towards the target, and then the impact. The Focke-Wulf exploded into a fiery ball, trailing smoke as it spiraled toward the earth. Romano stared at the sky in disbelief. It worked. He didn't have time to celebrate. The second attack came swiftly. This time, it was a Bf-109, coming in at the classic 6 o'clock low. Romano instinctively adjusted his aim, checked the mirrors, and fired again. The 109's canopy shattered. The fighter flipped upside down, trailing smoke, and then it was gone. In the span of just a few minutes, Romano had shot down 2 German fighters. His mind raced as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. This was it. His invention was working. It wasn't just a fluke. It was real. The rest of the mission was a blur. Romano returned to base with 2 confirmed kills and 1 probable, all achieved with less than 400 rounds of ammunition. That was a dramatic improvement from the standard tailgunner's expenditure of 2,800 rounds per confirmed kill. The effectiveness of his system was undeniable. But as the bomber taxied to its position on the hard stand, reality hit. Romano's unauthorized modification had been discovered. Crew Chief Master Sergeant Donald Pierce was the first to find it. He examined the tail section with a critical eye, noting the makeshift mirrors and the reflector sight. Without hesitation, he reported the modification to the squadron armament officer, Captain Richard Voss. The response was immediate and furious. "Sergeant Romano," Captain Voss said, his voice controlled but clearly angry, Would you care to explain the unauthorized equipment installed in your gun position? Romano stood at attention. Sir, I installed an improved sighting system, he said, as simply as he could. Voss's expression darkened. Do you have any comprehension of the regulations you violated? Technical Order 0120EG2 explicitly prohibits unauthorized modifications to defensive armament. This isn't a backyard hot rod, Sergeant. This is a combat aircraft. Romano was prepared for the anger. But what he wasn't prepared for was the reaction of his pilot, Lieutenant Holbrook, who stepped forward, a note of concern in his voice. Captain, my tail gunner got his first kill today using that sight. Maybe we should, Voss cut him off sharply. I don't care if he shot down the entire Luftwaffe. That equipment is not Army Air Force standard. Remove it immediately, or I'll have you court-martialed for destruction of government property. Romano swallowed hard. The reality of what he'd done was sinking in. He had risked everything, but there was something else. The results were undeniable. Despite the stern orders from Captain Voss, the wheels of bureaucracy didn't turn quickly enough to dismiss what had just happened. Romano's kill had made too much of an impact. It wasn't just the confirmed kills that stood out. It was the drastic reduction in ammunition needed to take down enemy fighters. The typical tail gunner spent thousands of rounds for each confirmed kill. Romano had proven that it was possible to shoot down a fighter with just 380 rounds. Major William Calhoun, the operations officer, saw the potential of Romano's modification immediately. He knew that with such high losses in bomber formations, a solution, however unconventional, was worth exploring further. He had to admit it. What Romano had done was not just a minor tweak. It was a game changer. The tail gunners were finally able to do what they were supposed to do: protect the bomber and crew. I know the regulations, Major, Captain Morrison, the assistant armament officer, protested, his voice tinged with apprehension. But there's no data to support this just one successful engagement. We can't just base decisions on one kill. Calhoun wasn't swayed. We don't have time to wait for all the data. We've been losing too many bombers to these tail attacks. We need to test this system, see if it holds up in the field. Captain Morrison's face turned red with frustration, but Calhoun pressed on. Put Romano up again tomorrow, with the modification in place. We'll get the gun camera footage. If it works again, we implement it. Simple as that. At the same time, there were growing concerns about safety. Several engineers were alarmed at the idea of unauthorized modifications to the B-17, and they questioned whether the mirrors and reflector sight could survive the extreme conditions in the tail section, with high-speed slipstreams and turbulence. Yet, with every argument against the innovation, Romano's first successful mission remained the elephant in the room. Colonel Stanley Ray, the commanding officer of the 91st Bomb Group, had seen it all. A veteran of World War I, Ray was no stranger to the tough decisions that came with leadership, but even he knew the numbers didn't lie. The bombers were being shot down at an unsustainable rate, and the tail gunners, despite their best efforts, were failing to stop it. Ray called an emergency meeting with his senior officers. The debate was fierce. Some wanted to stick to the established protocols, the regulations, the proper way of doing things. Others, including Calhoun, argued that Romano's modification, though unauthorized, might be the key to saving lives. Gentlemen, Ray began after hearing both sides, his voice calm yet firm. How many bombers did we lose last week? 17, sir, Morrison replied reluctantly. Ray nodded slowly, his eyes piercing. And how many fighters did our tail gunners shoot down? 3, sir, came the reply. Ray's voice became sharp. 17 bombers, 680 American boys, against 3 confirmed German fighters. What the hell are we doing here? He turned to Romano. Sergeant, I don't care how you did it. I care that you did it. You're flying the next 3 missions with that system in place. We'll collect more data. If it works again, we'll authorize it across the group. If it doesn't, we'll take it off, and you'll face the consequences. Understood? Romano stood tall, his nerves steeled by the weight of what was about to happen. Yes, sir. Ray turned to the engineers. Get me those mirror drawings, and let's see what we can do with this. It wasn't a perfect solution. It wasn't even official. But in the heat of battle, when so many had already died, it was the best shot they had. By the time the 20th of October 1943 arrived, Romano's makeshift mirror system was no longer just a one-off solution. It was becoming the key to improving the survival rate of American bomber crews. Colonel Ray's decision to authorize its use across the 91st Bomb Group set the stage for a dramatic shift in how B-17 crews would defend themselves against the relentless attacks from Luftwaffe fighters. Over the next few weeks, Kellerman and his team worked tirelessly to fabricate more of the mirror systems, using the scraps of wrecked aircraft and whatever materials they could salvage. They built 4 new systems per day, working day and night to equip all the B-17 seconds in the 91st Bomb Group with the new tail gunner modification. The effects were immediate and dramatic. On the 20th of October 1943, during the Duran mission, tail gunners equipped with Romano's mirror-reflector sight system engaged 47 fighter attacks, resulting in 11 confirmed kill-sir hit rate of 23.4%. That was nearly triple the previous average. This wasn't just a fluke, it was proof that Romano's system worked. The B-17 crews now had a way to accurately track and engage enemy fighters that came in from the rear. The system provided real-time feedback, allowing gunners to correct their aim as they fired, significantly increasing their chances of hitting the target. The following weeks continued to prove the effectiveness of Romano's innovation. On the 3rd of November 1943, during the Wilhelmshaven mission, gunners with the mirror system achieved 16 confirmed kills out of 68 fighter attacks, with a hit rate of 23.5%. The transformation was clear. Tail gunners were now a real threat to Luftwaffe pilots, who had previously exploited the B-17's vulnerability from behind with relative ease. By mid-November, the impact of the new system was undeniable. German fighter tactics had to change. Luftwaffe after-action reports noted the increased effectiveness of American tail guns, and pilots who had once relied on attacking B-17 seconds from the rear now had to rethink their approach. The increased risk of being shot down while attacking from 6 o'clock low forced the Germans to adapt their tactics, shifting to head-on attacks. While this was more dangerous for the fighters, it was now the only way to avoid the accurate defensive fire from the bombers' tail gunners. In early December 1943, Brigadier General Frederick Castle, commander of the 4th Bomb Wing, visited Bassingbourn unannounced. After inspecting the modified B-17 seconds and reviewing the gun camera footage from the missions, he was convinced. The results spoke for themselves. The mirror-reflector system had transformed the B-17 tail gun position from a weak point into a powerful line of defense. General Castle authorized the immediate installation of the mirror-reflector system across all B-17 seconds in the 4th Bomb Wing. Within 30 days, over 200 bombers were equipped with the modification, and the effects on bomber survivability were profound. In fact, between October 1943 and March 1944, B-17 seconds, with the improved tail gun sights, experienced a 35% decrease in tail attack losses compared to earlier models. This meant hundreds of bombers and thousands of crew members were saved, crew members who would have otherwise been lost to the Luftwaffe's relentless tail attacks. By the end of the war, Michael Romano had become a quiet hero, though his name would never grace the history books in the way many other famous figures did. He continued flying combat missions until February 1944, eventually earning 7 confirmed kills and 4 probably a remarkable feat for a tail gunner. But even more significant than his personal achievements was the lasting impact of his innovation. Romano's mirror-reflector system, initially conceived as a crazy idea by a desperate young man, became the standard for defensive armament on B-17 seconds. It wasn't just a small tweak, it was a solution that saved thousands of lives. The innovation spread from the 8th Air Force in England to the 15th Air Force in Italy, influencing not just B-17 seconds, but also B-24 Liberators and other aircraft that faced similar challenges. It was a testament to the power of simple, grassroots innovation, something that couldn't be predicted by the military engineers or the bureaucratic systems that dominated the war effort. Romano's success led to a dramatic shift in the way tail gunners could defend their bombers. The reflector sights and mirror systems allowed them to aim with accuracy, giving them the ability to defend against fighter attacks in real time. The impact on bomber survivability was clear. The Luftwaffe pilots, who had once dominated tail gunners, now faced a formidable enemy in the sky. And while the Luftwaffe eventually adapted to new tactics, the American bomber crews had gained a significant advantage. After the war, Romano returned to Pittsburgh, where he lived a quiet life as a machinist. He rarely spoke of his wartime experiences, and when Boeing engineers invited him to discuss his innovation, he politely declined. "I just made what I needed to survive," he said. To him, it wasn't about fame or recognition, it was about doing what was necessary to stay alive and to protect his comrades. Romano's legacy lived on in the B-17 Cheyenne turret, which incorporated his reflector sight principles into its design. Modern tail gunnery systems, including those used in aircraft like the B-52 Stratofortress, still carry the core concept of Romano's innovation: give the gunner the clearest possible picture of where his weapons point and where his targets are moving. In 1983, at a reunion of the 91st Bomb Group, one of Romano's fellow tail gunners, Gerald Hammond, brought a salvaged mirror bracketone of the very ones used in the modified B-17 seconds. Holding it up in front of Romano, now 60 years old, Hammond said simply, "Because of you and those mirrors, I came home. My kids exist because you couldn't accept lousy gun sights. Thank you." Romano, ever humble, shrugged. "You would have done the same thing," he said. "We all just wanted to survive long enough to go home." But Hammond was right. Not everyone would have thought of a solution. Not everyone would have had the courage to break the rules to save lives. Michael Romano was a man who refused to accept a broken system, and in doing so, he changed the course of the war and saved countless lives. Romano passed away in 2003, and his obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette mentioned his military service in a single line. It didn't mention his groundbreaking innovation. It didn't mention how he saved thousands of lives. It didn't mention the mirrors and salvaged parts that turned him into an unsung hero. But sometimes the greatest innovations come from those who don't wait for permission. They come from people like Michael Romano, people who refuse to sit idly by when others are dying, and who, against all odds, find a way to survive. This is the story of one man's crazy idea that saved lives, changed military history, and proved that sometimes the best solutions don't come from the top down. They come from those willing to break the rules when the rules aren't enough to keep them alive. If this story helped you see history differently, hit that subscribe button. We're covering stories the history books missed. Our next video reveals the radar operator who won D-Day from a basement in Portsmouth. You won't want to miss it.